Hello everyone, my name is Serena and today I'm going to be giving you a presentation on women in the Crusades. And the reason why I chose this topic was because I was really interested in exploring the topics of women and their roles during the Crusade era. So with that being said, let's get started. So some general conceptions about women in the Crusade era was that there was a lack of voices for women and a lack of sources. So because of this, it became hard to analyze roles of women during the Crusades until recent centuries when there have been an increase in sources. But as we'll see later on, the voices of women, there is really a lack of based on the accounts and sources that have been discovered. There were specific roles that women had. These ones in particular, washerwomen, cooks, and prostitutes, were more geared towards men. And these roles were quoted by Mayer as these services were not seen in a positive light, prostitution especially. So these roles were not really great for women to be seen in during the time of the Crusades. Some women did, however, dress up as men on the battlefield. They wore their armor, wore masculine clothing, while others were more of a support system for men. And noble women also participated in the Crusades too. They had their own troops, so they were more military based. They focused on more of the military aspects of the Crusades rather than, say, the support part of the Crusades. And they were also accompanied by their spouses, or they were also widows. Noble women were also widows during the time of the Crusades as well. Some of them were. During his speech at the First Crusade, Pope Urban II did not expect many women to travel during the First Crusade. But they did, and their roles during the First Crusade began as supporting the fighting men with food and water, encouragement, and prayer. And this was noted by Nicholson in her source, which is a really good source I would recommend reading if you are researching about women in the Crusades. Women also appeared as weak and fell into the category of non-combatants alongside with children and the elderly. And a little fun fact here is that they were blamed for the Second Crusade, as it is quoted by Nicholson again. They were blamed for the failure of that crusade on the misconduct of women. So it was really interesting to see that women were blamed for their participation and their misconduct towards the Second Crusade, and that's why they were blamed for the failure of the crusade. A woman of the Crusade that I really wanted to talk about more was Margaret of Beverley. And the reason why Margaret of Beverley interested me is because of what's going to be on the next slide. But first, before we get to that, I want to talk about her little journey that I read about in the account from Mayer on the roles of women during the Crusades. So Margaret of Beverley did take up the sign of the cross, as noted here by Mayer. Mayer quoted that she took the sign of the cross as an adult and left for the Holy Land. She was captured a couple of times by Muslim forces on 2 different occasions, but she was eventually freed. She did fight on the front lines. She also wore men's clothing, as well as stated earlier in the slides, where women also donned the clothing of men. The interesting thing about Margaret of Beverley was that her account was written by her brother, Thomas of Freudmont. And there's a problem with him writing this account. It was because his account was labeled as stereotyping the roles women had during the Crusades. And this brings us to our next point of stereotypes of women during the Crusades. So because of Thomas of Freudmont, he and many other men that wrote about the Crusades during that era fell into the category that the sources about women during the Crusades were written by men. So Thomas fell into this category because of his account on his sister Margaret of Beverley. And Mayer says here, and I quote, that they portrayed crusading as a typical male activity because crusading is typically seen by the public as a male activity and a male journey, and one that men should be taking. Also, because of this, women were also portrayed as having a lack of body strength, unlike men who had plenty. And women crusaders were not represented with the same characteristics as male crusades were, as noted here by Christopher Mayer, where he says that males were, and I quote, pious, obedient to God, and fearless in battle. That was from Mayer, from his account. And these stereotypes presented difficult findings for women, such as motivations for their reasoning to join the Crusades, the military campaigns that they had to join the Crusades, and so much more. And an interesting quote here by Mayer is, he says, and I quote, the primary aim behind the individual's Crusades effort was the salvation of his or her soul. So Crusade really, the main reason why people joined the Crusades, the primary reason was, as Mayer said, was because of the salvation of his or her soul. They wanted to devote their life to God for religious reasons. And that's really what crusading was all about, was devoting your life to God and taking up the sign of the cross. That's why so many people did. To accompany or not to accompany their husbands. So it needs to be said that women could participate in the Crusades, but they needed the consent of their husbands. And if not their husbands, then their fathers, if they weren't married. As quoted here by Nicholson, married or single women would be criticized for involvement in warfare when they acted outside the authority of husband or father. So women needed to be authorized for what they did in the Crusades by their husband or their father. So that's why this kind of explains that it limits their actions of women during the Crusades. And also noted during the Council of Clermont by Pope Urban II, some women decided to take up the cross in order to accompany their husbands because, and this quote here, and I'm just going to summarize it by Eddington from the Experts of Chanson d'Antioch, women cried at the Council of Clermont when they heard that men were needed in battle. They made vows to God when they got married that they would be faithful to you. So they were encouraging their husbands to go into war during the first crusade, because this was taking place during the First Crusade. So that's why women encouraged their husbands to go on the First Crusades, because the First Crusade was seen more as a male activity to do. But as noted in the first slide, females did also join the Crusades as well, especially the First Crusade. This is my last point here. Prostitution. As I mentioned earlier, prostitution was one of the roles geared towards men. And their definition of prostitute is different from today's definition of prostitution. And basically, it's going to summarize it here, is that women to fail to give an appearance of modesty, let alone engage in sexual activity outside of bonds of marriage, meant that she was a prostitute. This is from Kostick and his source about women, if they were either prostitutes or pilgrims, from his source. And also during the First Crusade, monks saw this as a time of abstinence, which was really interesting because monks in the source from Kostick, whenever they didn't see abstinence happen, they were disgusted, they were revolted, they just didn't understand why they were disobeying the law of abstinence, because the monks saw the First Crusade as a pilgrimage. That's really the main reason why. Men also saw women as a source of sexual temptation, as quoted here by Nicholson, and this portrayed women in a negative light because of their gender alone. So this gives women a bad rep because women were seen as a source of sexual temptation, when that wasn't the case, as we've gone over throughout this presentation, that women participated, they supported, they wore clothing of men, and they did so much more. And because of them being seen as sexual temptation, they were also captured because of the beauty and vitality they showcased. And quoted here by Kostick again, only delicate young girls and nuns, I'm going to summarize it, that they, whose faces and beauties seemed to please the eyes, and beardless young men with charming expressions they took away. So women were also feared of being captured. As I noted earlier with Margaret of Beverley, women were captured also because of their beauty and vitality also. And with that being said, this is my bibliography, and this is just the end of my presentation. And I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for listening. I really enjoyed researching this topic, and I hope that you have enjoyed learning about it with me. Thank you, and I hope you have a good day.